And of course, we had that statement out of the White House, James, a joint statement involving a number of countries, but Australia, we were a notable absent.
Well, we were a notable absence, and in fact, around the world, Peta, they're looking at social media and seeing vision of what happened in front of the Opera House the other night, our most iconic building that's, an architectural ambassador to the world. And this is the same government, too, by the way. I just remind everybody that likes to go around saying, oh, well, if we vote no to the voice, the world will be watching. They'll think we're a terrible country, and yet I think the world is actually looking at what's going on in Sydney, in Melbourne, and as you point out, Peta, the conspicuous absence of our name from that joint declaration. It's just shocking, and I just feel like the Albanese government has been caught so flat-footed on this. They had a whole plan about, getting the voice through the last week here that they took their eye well off the ball with this. And it's just, it's been terrible for everybody concerned, not the least the Jewish community, which has now had to live in fear, which has been told they can't go to commemorate their dead in Israel. I mean, thank God they've got this event going on now in the eastern suburbs, but it's interesting that all the ministers are down at some fundraiser in Melbourne rather than going to, join in solidarity.
I might add there, though, I will stick up the Prime Minister on this point. He has attended a synagogue in Melbourne late this afternoon. He is now at that fundraiser, as you say. I should have vision of the fundraiser. Should also have vision of Peter Dutton at that large event in Sydney. I'll play that when I have it. But just on the media, Sophie, this moral equivalence, in part, I think it's historical ignorance and lack of understanding. I mean, Hamas is a proscribed terror organisation in Australia. In England, the BBC, they refused to call them a terror organisation. They called them militants. Now, that's obscene. But the other night here, the ABC gave a platform to one of the organisers of an anti-Semitic protest, enable that person to say why they didn't like the Israel flag to be there in solidarity on the Opera House. Now, I have a real problem with that too.
Well, Peter, it's pretty disgraceful, but I'm not surprised from the ABC. But just going back to what you mentioned at the start there with the BBC, I mean, that's absolutely disgraceful as well. As you said, Hamas is deemed a terrorist organisation here in Australia and should be described as that. I don't really understand why media are holding back on this. They are what they are. Say what they are. The Australian public, when they're listening to the media report on the events happening overseas, they should report it factually, and that is a fact. But again, we see the media, who are skewed a certain way, trying to kind of protect that, Peter, which is just absurd.
Hey, look, just before we go, Sophie, that very surprise announcement that Cheng Lei is now home in Australia. I understand you've had contact with the family.
Very brief contact this afternoon, Peter. I mean, what an amazing story. Cheng Lei's home after 3 years behind bars in Beijing. I spoke to her partner, Nick Coyle. He lives in Port Moresby. I spoke to him very briefly on the phone this afternoon. He had just landed in Melbourne. He was obviously just totally overwhelmed with what was unfolding, and he was on his way to see Cheng Lei after 3 years. He still hadn't met with her. He was going to see her and be reunited with her and her 2 children and her family here in Melbourne. I mean, I will say, Peter, for this case, the Prime Minister and Penny Wong, absolute kudos to them. This was such a delicate situation, and to bring Cheng Lei home after what seemed like was a never-ending tale of horror of her remaining behind bars, a remarkable story, and hopefully we'll hear from her in the coming days or weeks when she's prepared to speak to Australians about her amazing return home.
Yes, I echo the credit there to the Prime Minister and to Penny Wong and, of course, our DFAT officials in Beijing. James and Sophie, thank you.